Once upon a time, there was a wizard who forgot his magic. Before we get to the story, I want to get cozy and comfortable as many people listen to this stories at bedtime. Comment where you are watching from and give us a thumbs up. The Wizard Who Forgot His Magic. Once upon a time, in a distant land, lived an old wizard in his tower. The tower shook violently as another explosion echoed through the stone walls. Wizard Aldrich grabbed his wooden staff and stumbled backward, his long silver beard singed at the edges. Purple smoke billowed from the cauldron in front of him, filling his workshop with the smell of burnt cinnamon and regret. "Not again," he muttered, waving his hand to clear the smoke. This was the third failed spell today, and the sun had barely risen over the mountains. Aldrich had been the greatest wizard in the kingdom of Lumaria for 50 years. Kings sought his counsel, villages celebrated his name, children dreamed of studying under him. But lately, something had changed. His spells fizzled out like wet candles, his potions turned to mud, his enchantments lasted barely an hour before breaking apart like morning mist. He walked to his window and looked out over the valley below. The trees were turning golden with autumn, and farmers worked in their fields, preparing for the harvest. Everything seemed peaceful and right. Everything except him. A knock at the heavy wooden door interrupted his thoughts. Aldrich waved his staff, and the door creaked open. A young girl stood at the entrance, no more than 12 years old, with dirt on her face and tears in her eyes. "Please, Master Aldrich," she said, her voice trembling. "My father is sick. The village healer says only magic can save him now. Will you help us?" Aldrich felt his stomach tighten. He wanted to help. He had always helped. But what if his magic failed again? What if he made things worse? "Come in, child," he said softly. "Tell me what happened." The girl stepped inside, her eyes wide as she took in the hundreds of bottles, books, and mysterious objects that filled every corner of the tower. Her name was Elena, and she explained that her father had been bitten by a shadow serpent while hunting in the western woods. The venom was spreading, and he had perhaps 2 days left. Aldrich knew the cure. He had made it 100 times before, but his hands shook as he reached for his ingredients. What if his magic had truly left him? What if he was no longer the wizard everyone believed him to be? Still, he could not turn away a child in need. He began to gather moonflower petals, crystal water from the northern springs, and powdered starlight from his highest shelf. Elena watched him carefully, hope flickering in her eyes like a fragile flame. As Aldrich prepared the ingredients, he noticed something strange. His hands steadied, his mind cleared. For the first time in weeks, he felt a small spark of the old magic warming in his chest. Perhaps it was the girl's trust. Perhaps it was the simplicity of helping someone who truly needed him. He began to chant the ancient words, stirring the mixture in a small copper bowl. The liquid started to glow with a soft blue light. Aldrich held his breath. The glow grew brighter, then suddenly flickered and died. The potion turned gray and lifeless. Elena's face fell. "Does this mean you cannot save him?" Aldrich stared at the failed potion, feeling the weight of his uselessness pressing down on him. But then he looked at the girl's face, at her desperate hope, and he made a decision. "No," he said firmly. "It means I need to remember something I have forgotten, and you are going to help me." Elena wiped her tears. "What did you forget?" "That is exactly what we need to discover," Aldrich said, pulling a heavy book from his shelf. Magic is not just about spells and potions. It comes from somewhere deeper. And I think I have been looking in all the wrong places." He sat down at his wooden table and gestured for Alana to join him. Together they began to search through his old journals, looking for answers that Aldrich had once known, but had somehow lost along the way. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything in warm golden light. And though Aldrich did not know it yet, his greatest lesson was just beginning. The candles burned low as Aldrich and Elena read through journal after journal. Outside, the stars began to appear, one by one, like tiny promises in the darkening sky. Aldrich's eyes ached from reading his own cramped handwriting, words written decades ago when his magic flowed as naturally as breathing. "Listen to this," Elena said, pointing to a page in one of the older journals. "You wrote, 'Magic is not a tool to be used, but a river to be joined. It flows through those who remember they are part of something greater than themselves.'" Aldrich leaned closer, squinting at the words. Had he really written that? It sounded wise, but also distant, like advice from a stranger. "I do not understand what that means," he admitted quietly. Elena looked at him with surprise. "You do not understand your own words?" "I wrote many things when I was younger," Aldrich said, feeling suddenly very old and very tired. "But writing wisdom and living wisdom are two different things." A comfortable silence fell between them. Then Elena spoke again, her voice soft but steady. "My grandmother used to say that when you lose something important, you must go back to where you last felt whole." "And where was that?" Aldrich asked. "She never told me. She said everyone's place is different." Aldrich stood up and walked to his window again. When had he last felt truly whole? Not just powerful or respected or admired, but genuinely at peace with himself and his magic. The answer came to him suddenly, like a door opening in his memory. "The forest," he said. "When I was young, I learned magic in the Whispering Forest. I had no tower then, no reputation, no people depending on me. Just trees and silence and discovery." "Then we should go there," Elena said, standing up with determination. "Now? At night? Your father needs the cure soon." "My father taught me that sometimes the fastest way forward is to first take a step backward," Elena said. "Besides, we are not helping him by sitting here reading. We need to find what you lost." Aldrich looked at this brave young girl and felt something stir inside him. She was right. He had been sitting in this tower for years, surrounded by the evidence of his past achievements, trying to recreate magic that came from a person he no longer was. "Very well," he said, "but the Whispering Forest is dangerous at night." "Then we will be careful," Elena replied. Aldrich gathered a few supplies, his staff, a lantern, some bread and cheese, and a small vial of protective dust. Together they descended the spiral stairs of the tower and set out into the night. The air was cool and crisp, filled with the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves. The walk to the forest took nearly an hour. As they approached the tree line, Aldrich's heartbeat quickened. He had not been here in 30 years. The trees seemed taller than he remembered, their branches reaching toward the sky like dark fingers. They stepped into the forest, and immediately the world changed. The sounds of the night faded, replaced by a gentle whispering that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. This was why it was called the Whispering Forest. The trees here were ancient and aware, and they spoke to those who knew how to listen.
"What are they saying?"
Elena whispered. "I do not know anymore," Aldrich admitted. "I used to understand them, but I have forgotten how to listen." They walked deeper into the forest, following a path that Aldrich's feet remembered, even if his mind did not. The lantern cast dancing shadows on the moss-covered ground. Occasionally, Aldrich would stop and touch a tree, hoping to feel some connection to his younger self, but nothing came. After a while, they reached a small clearing where a stream bubbled over smooth rocks. Aldrich stopped suddenly, his breath catching in his throat. "This is it," he said. "This is where I learned my first real spell." Elena looked around the peaceful clearing. What happened here? Aldrich sat down on a large rock beside the stream, and the memories came flooding back. He had been 17 years old, frustrated and angry because his spells kept failing. His teacher, an old woman named Sarah, had brought him to this exact spot. "Sit down," Aldrich said to Elena, patting the rock beside him. "I need to tell you what I learned here, and maybe in telling you I will remember it myself." Elena sat down, and Aldrich began his story. He told her about young Aldrich, so eager to prove himself, so desperate to be powerful and important. He told her about how Sarah had asked him a simple question: "Why do you want magic?" "I told her I wanted to help people," Aldrich said, "but she saw through me. She asked me again and again, peeling away my practiced answers like layers of an onion. Finally, I told her the truth. I wanted people to need me. I wanted to be special and respected. I wanted to matter." "What did she say?" Elena asked. "She laughed," Aldrich said, smiling at the memory. "Not meanly, but with genuine joy. She told me that was perfectly natural and human, but then she said something I have never forgotten until now. She said, 'Magic born from the need to matter eventually runs dry. Magic born from love of the world itself flows forever.'" The words hung in the air between them, and Aldrich felt something shift inside his chest. The stream continued its endless song, and the trees whispered their ancient secrets, and suddenly Aldrich understood what had happened to his magic. He had not lost his power. He had lost his purpose. The realization hit Aldrich like cold water. For years, he had been performing magic to maintain his reputation, to live up to expectations, to prove he was still the great Aldrich. He had been so focused on being important that he had forgotten why magic had called to him in the first place. "I fell in love with a tree when I was 7 years old," Aldrich said suddenly, the memory bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. "An old oak tree near my childhood home. I would sit under it for hours, just feeling its strength and age. I wanted to understand it, to connect with it, to be part of its quiet wisdom. That is when I first felt magic. Not as power, but as connection." Elena smiled. "That is beautiful. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that feeling," Aldrich continued. "I became more interested in what magic could do than in what magic was. I treated it like a tool, like something I owned. But magic is not something you possess. It is something you join." He stood up and walked to the stream. Kneeling down, he placed his hand in the cold water. He closed his eyes and did something he had not done in decades. He stopped trying to control. He stopped performing. He simply opened himself to the world around him. The water flowed over his fingers. The wind touched his face. The earth supported his knees. And slowly, gently, like the first light of dawn, he felt magic returning. Not as a surge of power, but as a quiet recognition. He was part of this world, connected to everything in it, and that connection itself was the source of all magic. Tears ran down Aldrich's weathered cheeks. "I remember now," he whispered. Elena knelt beside him. "Can you make the cure now?" Aldrich nodded. He reached into his bag and pulled out the ingredients he had brought. But this time, he did not think about spells or formulas. Instead, he thought about Elena's father, a man he had never met, but who was loved by this brave girl. He thought about the shadow serpent, a creature just trying to survive in the western woods. He thought about the interconnected web of life that held them all. He mixed the moonflower petals with the crystal water. He added the powdered starlight, and as he stirred, he whispered words that were not from any book. They were words of gratitude. Gratitude for the flowers that gave their petals. Gratitude for the springs that offered their water. Gratitude for the stars that shared their light. The mixture began to glow, but this time, the light was steady and true. It shimmered with all the colors of the rainbow, bright and alive. The cure was complete. "It worked," Elena cried, jumping to her feet. "Yes," Aldrich said, carefully pouring the potion into a small bottle. "But we must hurry. Your father needs this before dawn." They ran through the forest, faster than Aldrich had run in years. The trees seemed to help them, their branches pulling back to clear the path, their roots smoothing the ground beneath their feet. When they emerged from the forest, the first hint of gray was touching the eastern sky. They rushed to Elena's village, a small cluster of homes built around a central square. Elena led Aldrich to a modest house where a man lay in bed, his skin pale and his breathing shallow. A woman sat beside him, holding his hand. She looked up with red eyes as they entered. "Mother, this is Master Aldrich. He made the cure." Aldrich approached the bed and gently lifted the man's head. "Drink this," he said softly. "All of it." The man swallowed the glowing potion, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then color began to return to his face. His breathing deepened, his eyes fluttered open. Within minutes, he was sitting up, weak but clearly recovering. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." His wife embraced Aldrich, sobbing with relief. Elena hugged her father carefully, tears of joy streaming down her face. Aldrich stood back, watching the reunion, and felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with magical power. It was the simple joy of helping, of being part of someone else's happiness. As the sun rose fully over the village, Aldrich prepared to leave. Elena walked him to the edge of the village. "Will your magic work now?" she asked. "I believe it will, because I finally remembered what it is for. Magic is not about being important or powerful. It is about being connected. Connected to other people, to nature, to the whole living world. When I forgot that connection, I lost my magic. But you helped me remember." "I did not do anything," Elena protested. "You did everything," Aldrich said, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You reminded me that magic serves love, not pride. You reminded me to go back to my roots. You reminded me that sometimes the bravest thing is to ask for help. These are lessons I will not forget again. Elena smiled. Will you teach me magic someday? I think you already understand it better than most. But yes, if you wish, come to my tower when you are older. I would be honored to share what I know. As Aldrich walked back to his tower, the world seemed brighter and more alive than it had in years. Birds sang with particular beauty. The wind carried messages of change. Even the stones beneath his feet felt like old friends. His magic had returned, but more importantly, he had returned to himself. When he reached his workshop, he looked around at all his bottles and books with new eyes. These were not trophies of achievement. They were tools of connection, ways to help and heal and understand the world better. He sat down at his desk and opened a fresh journal. On the first page, he wrote, "Today I remembered that the greatest magic is not in what we can do, but in who we choose to be." Outside his window, autumn continued its slow transformation of the valley. Leaves fell and would become soil. Seeds slept and would become trees. Everything changed, and yet everything continued. Aldrich understood now that he was part of that cycle, not above it. And that understanding, more than any spell, gave him peace. He closed his eyes and rested, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people who needed help, new chances to practice the magic of connection. But for now, he was content. He had found what he had lost. He had come home to himself. And in that homecoming, he had discovered that the real magic had been there all along, waiting patiently for him to remember. The end. Hope you enjoyed our story. Give it a thumbs up and comment what you learned from it. You don't have to click off, as we have over 30 minutes of soothing sounds to get you to sleep. Enjoy and sweet dreams.